The chairman's voice cut across the library's community room like a blade. You need to leave. Now, this event is for actual veterans, not people looking for handouts. The old man sitting against the back wall didn't move. His weathered hands remained still on his lap, one unconsciously rubbing the deep scar running down his right leg. What the chairman didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that the limp he was mocking had been earned saving 11 Rangers pinned down in a valley that officially doesn't exist. Vincent Harlow had arrived at the library 2 hours before the military appreciation event began. He always did. The building opened at 9, and by 9:15 he was settled into his usual corner near the history section, the worn astronomy book open on his lap, though his eyes rarely focused on the pages anymore. The words had become a ritual rather than a reading, a way to fill the hours between dawn and dusk without drawing attention to himself. The event coordinator had set up the community room with rows of folding chairs, a refreshment table near the back, and a display board showcasing local military history. Vincent had watched from his corner as veterans began arriving. Men and women in their 50s and 60s, some wearing unit caps, others with service pins on their jackets. They moved with purpose, with pride, with the certainty of people who belonged. He had not planned to enter the room. But then he saw the boy. The child couldn't have been more than 10, walking beside his grandfather with wide eyes that took in everything. The old man with the boy wore an army sergeant's cap, his back straight despite the years. They had taken seats in the third row, the boy fidgeting with excitement as the grandfather pointed out items on the display board. Vincent had stayed in his corner until the boy's eyes found him. The child stared for a long moment, his gaze dropping to Vincent's leg, to the pronounced limp visible even when sitting, to the way the old veteran's right foot turned slightly inward from decades of compensating for damaged nerves. Then the boy had smiled, not with pity, just with the open curiosity of someone too young to have learned contempt. Something in that smile had made Vincent stand. His movements were precise despite the limp, an economy of motion that spoke of training so ingrained it had become permanent. He had walked to the community room entrance and taken a seat in the back corner, against the wall where he could see both exits. Old habits never died. Gerald Whitmore had been holding court near the refreshment table, his voice carrying across the room as he discussed his role as library board chairman. He wore an expensive suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, his posture that of a man who had never questioned his right to command any space he entered. He had been mid-sentence when he noticed Vincent. The chairman's face had changed in an instant. His expression shifted from practiced warmth to cold calculation, his eyes sweeping over Vincent's appearance with undisguised distaste. The worn flannel shirt 3 sizes too large. The donated work boots held together with duct tape. The hands scarred and weathered, the nails broken and stained despite scrubbing in the library bathroom. Vincent had kept his eyes down, his posture neutral. He knew what he looked like. He knew what people saw when they looked at him. 6 years of living rough had left marks that no amount of library sink washing could erase. Whitmore had moved with deliberate purpose across the room, his footsteps sharp against the linoleum. When he spoke, his voice was loud enough to ensure everyone heard. You need to leave. Now, this event is for actual veterans, not people looking for handouts. Vincent's hands had tightened briefly on his lap before relaxing again. His voice when he answered was quiet, hoarse from disuse. Yes, sir. I understand, sir. He had begun to rise, the movement slow and careful, his right leg straightening with visible effort. The boy's voice had stopped him. But Grandpa, why does he have to leave? He's not hurting anyone. Whitmore had turned to address the child with exaggerated patience. This is a special event for people who served our country, young man. We need to make sure there's room for real veterans. Vincent had frozen halfway between sitting and standing, the old injury sending sharp protests up his leg from the awkward position. The boy's grandfather had placed a hand on the child's shoulder, his eyes fixed on Vincent with an expression that wasn't quite suspicion, but wasn't trust either. I did serve, sir, Vincent had said, still speaking to the floor. With respect. Whitmore's laugh had been theatrical, designed to play to the room. Oh, I'm sure he did. Let me guess, Special Forces. Navy SEAL. Maybe you single-handedly won the war. His hand had gestured dismissively. I've heard every story. This event is for documented veterans with proof of service, not people claiming whatever sounds impressive. Vincent had completed the motion of standing, his full weight settling onto the damaged leg. The scar that ran from his knee to his ankle throbbed with the weather changes, a permanent barometer of old damage that no surgery had fully repaired. He had turned toward the exit, his gait uneven but steady, decades of practice making the limp as efficient as possible. Wait, the boy had said, his voice high and clear. Mister, why do you limp? Did you get hurt? The innocence in the question had hit Vincent harder than Whitmore's contempt. He had stopped at the doorway, his hand resting on the frame for support he didn't entirely need but had learned to accept. His other hand had moved unconsciously to his leg, fingers tracing the ridge of scar tissue visible even through the worn denim. I was doing my job, Vincent had said quietly. The boy's grandfather had stood then, his movements slow and deliberate. His eyes were fixed on Vincent's posture, on the way the old man stood when addressed despite the obvious pain, on the automatic respect in his bearing. What unit? The grandfather had asked, his voice careful. Whitmore had moved to intercept, his voice sharp with authority. That's enough. I won't have my event disrupted by someone looking for sympathy. He had closed the distance to Vincent in 3 strides, his hand reaching for the old man's arm. The contact had triggered something automatic in Vincent. His body had shifted, weight redistributing, arm pulling back in a defensive posture before conscious thought could stop the reaction. The movement had lasted less than a second before Vincent had caught himself, had forced his body back to stillness, had let Whitmore's hand close around his bicep. But in that second, the boy's grandfather had seen. The precision, the training, the muscle memory of a man who had spent decades responding to threats with lethal efficiency. Vincent had allowed himself to be guided toward the door, his expression neutral, his breathing controlled. Whitmore's grip had tightened as they walked, fingers digging into the old man's arm with casual cruelty. You're lucky I'm not calling the police, the chairman had said, loud enough for the room to hear. Trespassing, disturbing a private event, probably looking to steal from the refreshment table. The sleeve of Vincent's flannel shirt had ridden up slightly with Whitmore's grip. Just an inch. Just enough. The edge of a tattoo had become visible, black ink faded but still distinct against weathered skin. Coordinates. Numbers that meant nothing to most people, but everything to those who knew how to read them. The boy's grandfather had moved closer, his eyes locked on that partial glimpse of ink. His face had gone pale. Those coordinates, he had said, his voice barely above a whisper. Whitmore had released Vincent's arm with a dismissive shove, not noticing the tattoo, focused only on removing the unwanted presence. The room had gone quiet, 20 veterans and their families watching the scene unfold. Vincent had straightened his sleeve with careful precision, covering the tattoo again. He had turned to face the room, his eyes meeting the boy's for just a moment. The child's face held confusion and something else. Concern, as if a 10-year-old could sense the injustice of what he was witnessing. What the people in that room didn't know, what they couldn't know from looking at the homeless man being escorted out, was that Vincent Harlow had held a position for 20 hours with a shattered leg and a promise to a dying friend. That his call sign had been whispered with reverence in Ranger battalions from Georgia to Afghanistan. That the limp Whitmore mocked with such confidence had been earned in a firefight that saved 11 men and earned decorations that sat in a storage unit Vincent hadn't opened in 6 years. In exactly 7 minutes, when the boy's innocent question about the limp finally received its full answer, everything in that library would change. Vincent's hand remained on the doorframe, the boy's question hanging in the air like smoke. Why do you limp? The words triggered something deeper than memory, pulling him back to a place he had spent 6 years trying to forget. Afghanistan. October 2006. The Hindu Kush Mountains stretching in every direction like the spine of some ancient beast. Vincent had been 28 then, a Ranger sniper with 3 deployments behind him and a reputation for impossible shots. His spotter had been Eli Chun, a wiry kid from Sacramento with a degree in astrophysics and an obsession with the night sky that drove everyone in their unit crazy. The astronomy book in Vincent's coat pocket had belonged to Eli. Worn and water-stained, held together with tape and hope, the pages filled with calculations and star charts that Eli had used to calculate trajectories and wind patterns. At night, when they pulled overwatch duty, Eli would point out constellations and explain the mathematics of celestial motion with the same precision he used to spot targets at 1,500 meters. "You know what's amazing, Saber?" Eli had said one night, using Vincent's call sign. "The stars we're looking at don't even exist anymore. Some of them died millions of years ago. We're just seeing the light they left behind." Vincent had told him to shut up and focus on the valley below. But he had listened. He always listened when Eli talked about the stars. The mission had come down on October 12th. A ranger platoon conducting a clearing operation in Kunar province had walked into an ambush. Three-sided attack, heavy weapons, air support grounded by weather that had rolled in like a wall. 47 insurgents against 11 rangers, trapped in a valley with no cover and casualties mounting. Vincent and Eli had been inserted on the high ground 1,200 meters out. Their mission was simple: hold the ridge. By time, keep the rangers alive until extraction could arrive. Eli had set up the spotting scope with his usual efficiency, his movements quick and precise despite the altitude and the cold that turned breath to ice. He had started calling corrections before Vincent had even settled behind the Barrett M107. Wind 3.2 meters per second from the northwest. Temperature dropping. Humidity 72%. Target-rich environment. Vincent had taken the first shot at 0847 hours. The insurgent had dropped before the sound reached him. The second shot had come 30 seconds later. Then the third. Eli's voice had been constant in his ear, calm and measured, calling adjustments and new targets with the same tone he used when discussing star patterns. They had fallen into the rhythm that made them legendary in their battalion. Vincent's finger on the trigger, Eli's eye on the scope. Two men functioning as a single weapon system, their breathing synchronized, their focus absolute. By hour 4, they had taken out 23 confirmed targets. The Rangers in the valley had managed to consolidate their position, had stabilized their wounded, had started to believe they might survive. That was when the weather had turned worse. The wind had shifted, gusting and unpredictable, turning every shot into a calculation that pushed the limits of the rifle's effective range. Eli had compensated, his mathematics getting more complex, his calls coming faster. Hold left 2 mils. Up 0.5. Wait for the gust. Now, every shot had connected. Every target had fallen. The insurgents had started to understand they were being hunted by someone they couldn't see, couldn't reach, couldn't stop. They had begun to retreat, their attack losing cohesion. That was when Vincent's radio had crackled with the extraction timeline. 40 minutes. The helicopters were inbound. All they had to do was hold for 40 more minutes. Eli had grinned, his face barely visible in the scope's reflection. 40 minutes, Saber. Piece of cake. Then I'm buying you a beer and teaching you about binary star systems whether you like it or not. Vincent had told him he'd rather get shot. Eli had laughed. The mortar had hit the ridge at hour 12. Vincent never saw it coming. One moment Eli was calling a correction on a target near the valley's eastern edge. The next, the world had turned to fire and noise and the sick sensation of the ground disappearing beneath him. He had come on his back, his ears ringing so loud it drowned out thought. The sky above had been gray with smoke and cloud. His right leg had felt wrong, distant and cold, the pain not yet arrived, but the damage already catastrophic. Eli had been 3 meters away, his body twisted at an angle that meant shattered bones and internal bleeding. The spotting scope was gone, destroyed in the blast. The astronomy book had been blown from Eli's pack, its pages scattered across the rocks like fallen leaves. Vincent had crawled. His leg had dragged behind him, blood painting the stones, shrapnel embedded so deep he could feel metal grinding against bone. Every movement had been agony, but he had moved anyway because Eli was making sounds that meant he was alive, and that was all that mattered. The shrapnel had torn through Eli's chest and abdomen. Vincent's field training had told him immediately that the wounds were fatal. His hands had told him to ignore that and apply pressure anyway. His voice had told Eli to hang on. Help is coming. 40 minutes? Just hold on for 40 minutes. Eli's hands had found the astronomy book, crushed and ruined, but still recognizable. He had tried to laugh, the sound wet and broken. Should have been looking at the sky, not the scope. His fingers had left blood on the pages. Tell them about the stars, Saber. Tell them we were looking at something beautiful. Vincent had screamed for a medevac. His radio had been damaged in the blast, the transmission broken and scattered. Below, in the valley, the Rangers had been pinned down, unable to extract, unable to reach the ridge where their overwatch was bleeding out. Eli had gripped Vincent's hand with surprising strength. Not your fault. Never your fault. You stay on that rifle. Those Rangers down there need you. His breath had been coming in shorter gasps. Promise me. You finished the mission. Vincent had promised. What else could he do? Eli had died in his arms 90 seconds later. His last words something about Orion's belt and the mathematics of dying light. Vincent had stayed on the rifle. His leg had been destroyed, the bleeding controlled only by a tourniquet tied with shaking hands. The pain had been a living thing, trying to drag him into unconsciousness. He had fought it with Eli's voice in his head, with the memory of a promise, with the knowledge that 11 Rangers were still alive in that valley, and he was the only thing standing between them and a massacre. He had held that position for 6 more hours. 73 confirmed eliminations total. Every round had counted. Every shot had been for Eli, for the Rangers below, for the promise made to a dying friend who had cared more about stars than survival. The extraction had come at dusk. The Rangers had made it out. All 11. Vincent had been the last one loaded onto the helicopter, his leg so damaged the medics had argued for field amputation. He had refused, told them to save it or let him bleed out. Either way, he wasn't leaving that mountain without the leg Eli had died trying to protect. Vincent's hand left the library doorframe, returning to the present with the weight of 16 years pressing down. The boy was still looking at him with those wide, innocent eyes. The grandfather's face had gone pale, his gaze fixed on the edge of tattoo, still barely visible beneath Vincent's sleeve. The astronomy book in Vincent's coat pocket felt heavier than it should. He carried it everywhere. The pages Eli had touched, the calculations Eli had made, the dreams of a man who had died looking at beauty instead of violence. That was why he limped. That was the job he had been doing. That was the promise he had kept while his best friend's blood soaked into the Hindu Kush and the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. Whitmore's hand closed around Vincent's bicep with the casual cruelty of someone who had never been challenged. His fingers dug in, applying pressure meant to guide and humiliate in equal measure. Come on, we're done here. Out you go. Vincent let himself be pulled forward, his body compliant, his expression neutral. But some part of him, the part that had spent 20 years responding to contact with lethal precision, had already calculated the angles. Whitmore's grip was sloppy, his stance exposed, his confidence built on decades of never facing real resistance. Vincent could break the hold in 3 different ways, could have the chairman on the ground in under 2 seconds if muscle memory took over. He forced that part of himself down deep, back into the place where it had lived since he'd walked away from his daughter's hospital bedside 6 years ago. Survival on the streets meant staying invisible, and invisible men didn't use Ranger hand-to-hand techniques on library board chairmen, no matter how much they deserved it. The boy's voice cut through the murmur of uncomfortable witnesses. That's not fair. He didn't do anything wrong. Marcus had stood from his seat, his small hands clenched at his sides, his face flushed with the righteous indignation only children could summon so purely. The boy's grandfather reached for him, a gentle hand on his shoulder meant to pull him back, but Marcus shook it off. Whitmore paused, turning to address the child with exaggerated patience that fooled no one. Young man, this is an adult matter. We have limited space for this event, and we need to ensure actual veterans get priority seating. His grip on Vincent's arm tightened. This gentleman needs to leave so real service members can participate. I did serve, Vincent said again, his voice still quiet, still respectful despite the pain radiating from where Whitmore's fingers pressed into old scar tissue. With respect, sir. The chairman's laugh was theatrical, pitched to carry across the entire room. I'm sure you did. Let me guess, you were Navy SEAL. Or maybe Delta Force. Perhaps you single-handedly won the war in Afghanistan. His free hand gestured broadly to the gathered veterans, inviting them to share in the joke. I've been on this library board for 12 years. I've seen every con artist and every fake veteran that's crawled through these doors. You all have the same story. The boy's grandfather had moved closer, his eyes fixed on Vincent's arm, where Whitmore's grip had pulled the sleeve up another inch. More of the tattoo was visible now. The coordinates were clearer, the numbers precise and deliberate. Below them, partially obscured, were initials rendered in a different style of ink. E.C. Vincent saw the moment recognition began to dawn in the grandfather's face. The old sergeant's eyes widened fractionally, his breath catching, one hand rising unconsciously toward his own chest, as if reaching for dog tags no longer worn. What unit? The grandfather asked again, his voice careful but insistent now. Whitmore cut him off with an impatient gesture. Don't encourage him, George. These people are practiced liars. They know exactly what to say to pull on your heartstrings. He gave Vincent's arm a harder pull, moving him toward the door. Time to go. Now. Vincent's body reacted before thought could intervene. The pull had shifted his weight onto his damaged leg at the wrong angle. Pain spiking sharp and immediate. His arm had moved instinctively, breaking Whitmore's grip with a simple rotation that was pure muscle memory, his body dropping into a defensive stance that had been drilled into him 10,000 times over 2 decades. The movement lasted perhaps a second, maybe less, but every veteran in that room saw it. The precision, the efficiency, the absolute certainty of someone who had spent years training to respond to threats with overwhelming force. Vincent caught himself, forced his body to stillness, let his arms drop to his sides. His breathing remained controlled, his expression apologetic. I'm sorry, sir. You startled me. The words were soft, deferential, the tone of someone who knew better than to fight back. But the damage was done. Whitmore's face had gone red, his professional veneer cracking. You just assaulted me. Everyone saw it. He turned to the room, playing to his audience. This man just physically attacked the library board chairman during a veterans appreciation event. I lost my balance, Vincent said quietly. I apologize. I'll go. Marcus had pushed past his grandfather, moving between Vincent and Whitmore with the fearless certainty of a child who had not yet learned that size mattered. You were hurting him. I saw you. You were squeezing his arm really hard. Whitmore's expression shifted to something uglier. He looked down at the boy with barely concealed contempt. Son, go sit with your grandfather. Adults are handling this. George had reached them now, his hand gentle but firm on Marcus's shoulder, pulling the boy back. But his eyes never left Vincent's arm, where the sleeve had ridden up even further in the scuffle. The tattoo was almost fully visible now. Coordinates, a date, initials, and below that, partially obscured by the bunched fabric, the edge of something else. An emblem, a scroll. I know those coordinates, George said, his voice barely above a whisper. Whitmore rounded on him, patience exhausted. For God's sake, George, don't tell me you're falling for this. You probably got that tattoo last week. You can get anything inked for $50 in the right neighborhood. Vincent had begun to reach for his sleeve, intending to pull it down, to cover the evidence, to make himself invisible again. But Marcus's small hand caught his wrist, stopping him. His touch was gentle, trusting, the contact of someone who saw a person worth defending rather than a problem to be removed. Mr. Marcus said, looking up at Vincent with those wide, questioning eyes. Why did you get hurt? What happened to your leg? The question, asked with such innocent directness, hit harder than Whitmore's contempt. Vincent looked down at the boy, at the genuine concern in his face, and something in him fractured. Not broke, just cracked enough to let truth seep through. I was on a mountain, Vincent said slowly. My friend was next to me. A mortar hit our position. He died. I didn't. His hand moved unconsciously to his leg, fingers tracing the scar through worn denim. The shrapnel tore through the nerves and blood vessels, severed the fibular artery. The surgeon said I'd never walk again. His eyes met Marcus's. I told him I had a promise to keep. The room had gone quiet. 20 veterans and their families watching this broken old man explain his injury to a 10-year-old boy with more honesty than he'd shown anyone in 6 years. George's hand was trembling now, his eyes locked on the tattoo. Those coordinates. October 12th, 2006. Kinner Province. His voice gained strength, memory bringing details into focus. There was a ranger operation that day. An ambush. The platoon was trapped. They said the sniper who saved them held his position for 20 hours with a shattered leg. Whitmore's face had changed, uncertainty creeping in for the first time. He glanced at Vincent's arm, at the tattoo he dismissed as fake, at the numbers that were too specific to be random. That's ridiculous. If this man had done something that's significant, he wouldn't be homeless and trying to sneak into library events. Vincent pulled his sleeve down gently, covering the tattoo again. His voice remained quiet, tired. I should go. I didn't mean to disrupt your event. He looked at Marcus, managed something almost like a smile. Thank you for being kind. The world needs more of that. He turned toward the door, his limp more pronounced now, the confrontation having aggravated old damage. Each step sent sharp reminders up his leg, the scar tissue protesting, the embedded shrapnel that surgeons had never fully removed grinding against bone. Wait, George said, his voice carrying command that made even Whitmore pause. Sir, I was stationed at Bagram in 2006. I was there when they brought in the casualties from Kinner Province. I saw the after-action reports. He moved closer, his eyes searching Vincent's face. I heard about the sniper. They called him Saber. Said he held off an entire insurgent force alone after his spotter was killed. Saved 11 Rangers. Vincent's hand tightened on the doorframe. He didn't turn around. He didn't confirm. He didn't deny. He just stood there, caught between the past he'd been running from and the present that wouldn't let him disappear. Whitmore's voice had lost some of its certainty. Anyone could have heard that story, could have gotten a tattoo based on it. We need actual proof, not convenient coincidences and rehearsed backstory. Marcus had moved to Vincent's side, looking up at him with eyes full of questions. Is it true? Are you really a hero? Vincent's voice, when it came, was barely audible. No son. The heroes are the ones who didn't come home. Vincent's fingers remained on the doorframe, Marcus's question hanging between them like a challenge he couldn't ignore. The boy wanted to know if he was a hero. The simple answer would have been to say no and walk away. But the memory of that mountain, of Eli's blood on his hands and the promise made in those final moments, demanded more than simple answers. The valley had been a killing zone. Vincent could see it now as clearly as he'd seen it through his scope 16 years ago. 11 Rangers trapped in terrain that offered no cover, no escape, nothing but open ground and enemy fire converging from 3 sides. The lieutenant in command had been 24 years old, calling for air support that couldn't come, trying to keep his men alive with nothing but hope and suppressing fire from weapons running low on ammunition. Vincent and Eli had watched from the ridge 1,200 meters away. At that distance, most snipers would have struggled to guarantee hits on stationary targets. But these targets weren't stationary. They were moving, firing, using cover, and the wind was gusting hard enough to push a .50 caliber round off course by meters. Eli had made it possible. His calculations had been instantaneous, his corrections constant, his focus absolute. Target at 2 o'clock, distance 1,320 meters, elevation angle -15 degrees, wind gusting 4.1 meters per second, temperature dropping, hold right 1.2 mils and up 0.7. Fire when I say. Vincent had trusted every word. His finger on the trigger, his breathing synchronized with Eli's count, his world narrowed to the scope's view and his spotter's voice. The first insurgent had dropped at 0847 hours. The second 30 seconds later. By 0900 hours, they had eliminated 9 targets, and the Rangers below had managed to consolidate their position behind a low stone wall that provided minimal cover but was better than nothing. The insurgents had begun to realize they were being hunted. Vincent had watched through his scope as they tried to locate the source of the fire, scanning ridgelines, pointing in wrong directions, their confusion buying precious seconds. Eli had identified the enemy commander, a man directing fighters from a position behind a boulder 800 meters from the Ranger position. Long shot, saber. Wind's tricky, but if we take him out, they lose coordination. Vincent had waited for Eli's call. The wind had gusted again. Hold, hold. The moment between gusts had been perhaps 2 seconds. Now, the commander had dropped, his radio still in his hand. The insurgent attack had faltered, lost cohesion, fighters looking to leaders who were no longer there. By hour 6, Vincent's world had shrunk to the rifle, the scope, and Eli's voice. His shoulder ached from the recoil. His trigger finger had gone numb from the cold and the repetitive compression. His eyes burned from hours of focus. None of it mattered. Below them, Rangers were alive who should have been dead. That was all that counted. The extraction timeline had come through at hour 11. 40 minutes. The helicopters were inbound, but the weather was closing in fast. All they had to do was hold for 40 more minutes, and everyone would make it home. Eli had been recalculating trajectories when the mortar hit. Vincent didn't remember the impact itself. His mind had blanked that out, protecting him from the memory of sound and fire and the world turning inside out. What he remembered was after, the ringing in his ears so loud it felt like pressure, the taste of blood and dust, the wrongness in his leg that preceded pain by several crucial seconds. He had turned his head, movement that sent spikes of agony through his neck and spine, and seen Eli 3 meters away. The shrapnel had torn through his spotter's chest and abdomen, had shredded body armor that was supposed to stop anything short of a direct artillery hit. Blood was spreading across the rocks, too much blood, the kind of bleeding that meant minutes, not hours. Vincent had crawled. His leg had dragged behind him, useless and screaming, his hands finding purchase on stone slick with his own blood. Every movement had been negotiation with a body that wanted to shut down, wanted to retreat into shock and unconsciousness and relief from the pain. Eli's eyes had found him. The kid had tried to smile, had managed something that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so wet and broken. Guess I won't get to show you Andromeda tonight. His hands had scrabbled for something, found the astronomy book blown from his pack, its pages torn and blood-stained. Should have been watching the sky instead of the scope. Vincent's hands had been shaking too badly to apply proper pressure to the wounds. His field training screamed that Eli needed a trauma surgeon in the next 5 minutes, or he was dead. The nearest trauma surgeon was at Bugram, 40 minutes away by helicopter. 40 minutes that Eli didn't have. Get back on the rifle, Eli had whispered, each word costing him. Those Rangers need you. His grip on Vincent's wrist had been surprisingly strong. Promise me, you finish the mission. Don't let them die because of me. Vincent had promised, had screamed into a damaged radio for a medevac that couldn't reach them in time, had held Eli's hand while his spotter's breathing grew shallow and irregular, had listened to the kid talk about binary stars and light years and the beautiful mathematics of dying suns until the words stopped making sense and then stopped altogether. 90 seconds. That was how long Eli Chun had lasted after the mortar hit. 90 seconds of borrowed time that Vincent had spent making promises instead of taking shots. When Eli's eyes went empty, Vincent had crawled back to the rifle. His leg was destroyed, bone visible through torn flesh, blood loss making the world swim in and out of focus. The tourniquet he'd tied was barely adequate, bought time measured in hours, not days. He should have called for extraction for himself. Should have abandoned the position and tried to survive. But 11 Rangers were still pinned in that valley. And Eli's last words had been a command to finish the mission. Vincent had gotten back behind the Barrett M107. His hands had been steady despite the blood loss, despite the pain that was trying to drag him under. Eli's calculations had been written in a notebook, trajectories and wind calls good for the next hour if conditions held. Vincent had used them, had taken shot after shot with precision born of training and desperation and the memory of a promise made to a dying friend. The insurgents had broken at hour 17. The ones who could run had run. The ones who couldn't had died where they stood. By the time the helicopters arrived at dusk, 73 enemy fighters were dead and 11 Rangers were alive to board the aircraft. Vincent had been the last one loaded. The medics had argued for field amputation, said the leg was too damaged to save, said he'd die of infection if they didn't take it. He'd told them to save it or let him bleed out. Either worked. He wasn't leaving that mountain without the leg he'd kept Eli's promise on. In the library, Vincent's hand moved from the doorframe to his leg, fingers finding the scar through worn denim. The surgeons had saved the leg, but couldn't save the function. Nerve damage too extensive. Blood vessels too compromised. He'd walk, they'd said, but he'd never run again. Never jump. Never do the things Rangers did. They'd been right about everything except the never part. Vincent had learned to run with a limp, had learned to compensate, had returned to active duty with a medical waiver and sheer stubbornness. Had deployed twice more before his wife got sick and the real war had begun. Marcus's voice pulled him back to the present. Did your friend die because you couldn't help him? The question was innocent, curious, without accusation. But it landed like a blade between Vincent's ribs. Yes, he said quietly. I couldn't save him. All I could do was keep the promise I made. George had moved closer, his face pale, his voice shaking. The Ranger platoon that got extracted that day, they put the sniper up for the Medal of Honor. Said he'd held position for 20 hours with catastrophic injuries. Said his spotter died in the first minutes, and he kept fighting alone. His eyes searched Vincent's face. They said his call sign was Sabre. Whitmore's voice had lost its certainty, but retained its contempt. This is all very dramatic, but we still have no actual proof. Anyone could learn these details, could memorize an after-action report, and claim credit for someone else's sacrifice. Vincent pulled his sleeve down one final time, covering the tattoo completely. His voice, when he spoke, was tired, empty of everything except truth. I don't need to prove anything to you, sir. I came here to sit quietly and remember a friend who died 16 years ago today. The event coordinator never said it was restricted, but I apologize for the disruption. I'll leave. He turned toward the door, each step a reminder of promises kept and prices paid. Behind him, he heard Marcus asking his grandfather if the story was true, heard George's shaken response that he didn't know, but God help them all if it was. What Vincent didn't see was the library director, Sarah Brennan, standing in the hallway, her phone in her hand, her eyes wide with recognition as pieces fell into place in her mind. Sarah Brennan had been director of the public library for 8 years. Before that, she'd spent 6 years in the Army, including 2 deployments to Iraq as a logistics officer. She knew the look of a man carrying weight that had nothing to do with physical burden. She'd seen it in mirrors often enough after her own tours ended. She had noticed Vincent Harlow 3 years ago, when he'd first started appearing at the library's opening time with the kind of regularity that spoke of routine rather than chance. He was always polite, always quiet, always careful to take up minimal space. He read the same book every day, an old astronomy text that he handled with the reverence most people reserve for religious texts. He never caused problems, never asked for anything, never drew attention to himself. Sarah had learned through careful observation what he wouldn't volunteer, that he washed in the bathroom sink every morning with methodical precision, that he only drank water from the fountain, never coffee from the cafe, despite the cold months, that he carried everything he owned in a worn rucksack that he packed with military efficiency, that when the library closed at 8, he walked 6 blocks to sleep under the 4th Street Bridge. She had tried offering help once. Resources for housing assistance. Information about the VA. He had thanked her with quiet respect and never mentioned it again. She had learned that some people needed to be ready before they could accept salvation. Now, standing in the hallway watching the confrontation unfold, Sarah felt pieces clicking into place that she should have seen years ago. The way Vincent stood when addressed. the precision of his movements despite the limp, the unconscious habits that screamed military training to anyone who knew what to look for. Whitmore's voice carried from the community room, theatrical and certain. This is all very convenient storytelling, but I'm the chairman of this board, and I'm telling you this man needs to leave. If he was actually this legendary hero, where's his proof? Where's his discharge papers? Where's his DD-214? Sarah moved through the doorway, her voice calm, but carrying authority that came from years of managing both soldiers and civilians. Gerald, that's enough. Whitmore turned, irritation flashing across his face. Sarah, I'm handling this. This individual is trespassing at a private event. This is a public library hosting a community event, Sarah said, her tone measured. Anyone is welcome unless they're causing a disturbance. She looked at Vincent, who had frozen at the sound of her voice. From what I can see, the only person causing a disturbance is you. The chairman's face reddened. You're overstepping, Sarah. The board will hear about this. I'm sure they will, Sarah replied. She moved to the refreshment table, poured a cup of water, and walked it over to Vincent. Her movements were deliberate, sending a clear message about whose side she was taking. Sir, please stay. You're welcome here. Vincent took the water with trembling hands, his eyes meeting hers for just a moment. Thank you, ma'am, but I should go. I don't want to cause problems. You're not causing problems, Sarah said firmly. She turned to face Whitmore, her posture shifting into something that hadn't seen you since her active duty days. Gerald, you've made several accusations against this gentleman. You've physically grabbed him. You've publicly humiliated him. If anyone should leave, it's you. How dare you? Whitmore sputtered. I am the chairman of the board that approves your budget. I can make your life very difficult. Sarah smiled without warmth. You could try. In the meantime, this event continues and all veterans are welcome, including this gentleman. George had been watching the exchange with growing certainty in his eyes. He stepped forward, his voice steady. Ma'am, if I may, I need to ask this man some questions. Specific questions that only someone who was actually there could answer. Whitmore threw up his hands. This is ridiculous. You're all being taken in by a con artist. Then let me prove it, George said. He turned to Vincent, his eyes sharp. Sir, you said your spotter's name was Eli. What was his full name and rank? Vincent's voice was quiet. Spinalist Elitieng. He was 22. From Sacramento. George nodded slowly. The operation you described. Who was the lieutenant commanding the ranger platoon in the valley? Vincent's hand tightened on the cup. First Lieutenant Blake Morrison. He was 24. It was his first combat command. His eyes distant with memory. He wrote me a letter after. Said he named his firstborn son after Eli. The room had gone completely silent. George's face had paled, his hands shaking slightly. What weapon system were you using? Barrett M10750 caliber, Vincent said. Effective range around 1,800 meters in good conditions. We were pushing 1,300 to 1,500 most of the day. He paused. Eli's calculations made the impossible shots possible. Whitmore's voice had lost its certainty, but not its contempt. Anyone could research these details. Look up after-action reports. Memorize facts. George shook his head slowly. After-action reports are classified. I only know what I know because I was there, because I processed the casualty reports when they brought them in. He looked at Vincent with something approaching awe. The sniper they brought in had a shattered fibula, severed artery, embedded shrapnel that surgeons spent 11 hours removing. They said he'd fired his rifle for 6 hours after his spotter died. That he'd kept an entire insurgent force pinned down alone. Sarah had moved closer, her eyes fixed on Vincent's face. She had studied military history at West Point before her commission, had written papers on Medal of Honor recipients and the actions that earned them. The pieces were assembling in her mind with terrible clarity. Saber, she said quietly. That was the call sign they used in the reports. The sniper who held the ridge. She met Vincent's eyes. Vincent Harlow, you were up for the Medal of Honor. Vincent's hands were shaking badly enough that water sloshed from the cup. He set it down carefully on a nearby table. I didn't accept it. Eli earned it, not me. Marcus had been listening with wide eyes, his young mind trying to process what the adults were discussing. So you really are a hero, he said, his voice filled with wonder. No, son, Vincent said, his voice breaking slightly. I'm a man who lived when better people died. That's not heroism. That's just stubbornness and luck. Whitmore had recovered some of his composure, though his voice had lost its command. Even if this story is true, it doesn't explain why a decorated veteran is homeless and sneaking into library events. If you're this legendary soldier, where's your support? Where's your family? Where's your life? The question hit Vincent like a physical blow. Sarah saw it in his face, saw the walls that had been slowly cracking threaten to collapse entirely. She moved between them, her voice sharp. That's enough, Gerald. This man's personal circumstances are none of your business. But Whitmore had scented weakness and pressed forward. No, I think it's my business. Because if he's really this hero, then something went very wrong to bring him here. And I want to know what. Vincent's voice, when it came, was barely audible. My wife died. Cancer. 6 years ago. I couldn't face my daughter. Couldn't look at her without seeing what I'd lost. He paused, each word costing him. So I left, told her to live her life, that she was better off without me. The room had gone silent again, but this silence was different, heavier, filled with the weight of loss that transcended military service. George's voice was gentle. What's your daughter's name, son? Elena. Vincent whispered. De Elena Harlow. Last I knew, she was finishing her residency in pediatric oncology. Try to save kids the way I couldn't save her mother. His hands found his leg again, the unconscious gesture of man seeking something solid to hold on to. I watch her social media sometimes, from the library computers. She's accomplished, successful, better than I ever was. Sarah had pulled out her phone, was already searching. Within seconds, she'd found Dr. Elena Harlow's professional page. Her foundation, her mission statement, the words that made Sarah's breath catch. For my father, Vincent Harlow, call sign Saber. Wherever you are, please come home. I've been looking for 6 years. Sarah turned the phone toward Vincent, her own eyes wet. She's been looking for you. All this time. Vincent stared at the screen, at his daughter's words, at the foundation she'd built in his name. His face crumpled, 6 years of carefully maintained walls collapsing under the weight of love he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve. Marcus had moved to his side, had taken Vincent's hand with the fearless compassion of childhood. You should call her, the boy said simply. I bet she misses you. Whitmore stood frozen, his face pale, the magnitude of his mistake finally registering. Around the room, phones were coming out, recording, documenting the moment when a library board chairman had publicly humiliated a Medal of Honor nominee who had been quietly mourning on the anniversary of his spotter's death. Vincent stared at the phone screen, at his daughter's words, at the foundation she had built while he'd been sleeping under bridges and convincing himself she was better off without him. The text blurred as his eyes filled with tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed in 6 years. She had been looking. All this time, she had been looking. His hand moved unconsciously to his coat pocket, to the photograph he carried. The edges were worn soft from years of handling. The image faded but still clear enough to show Elena at 18, her graduation gown billowing in the wind, her mother's arm around her shoulders. It had been taken 2 months before the cancer diagnosis. 3 months before everything fell apart. Sarah watched Vincent's face, saw the walls crumbling, saw the careful distance he'd maintained between himself and the world beginning to collapse. She knew that look, had seen it in her own reflection after her deployments, that moment when the armor finally cracked and all the carefully buried pain came flooding through. She touched his shoulder gently. We can call her right now if you want. I have her office number here. Vincent shook his head, the movement sharp and panicked. No, I can't. She's accomplished so much. Built a whole foundation. Saved children. She doesn't need me showing up now, broken and homeless and useless. Whitmore had recovered some of his composure, though his voice had lost its aggressive edge. See, this is what I mean. If this story were true, if he really was this decorated soldier, he wouldn't be hiding from his own family. Something doesn't add up. George turned on him with surprising anger. You don't understand a damn thing about what this man carries. His voice was tight with emotion. I've seen what combat does to people. I've seen men come home from war and not know how to live in peace. And when you add grief on top of that, when you lose the person who made coming home worthwhile, sometimes disappearing feels like mercy. Marcus still held Vincent's hand, his small fingers wrapped around the old man's scarred knuckles. My mom died too, the boy said quietly. Last year. Cancer. Grandpa says it's okay to be sad. That missing people doesn't make you weak. Vincent looked down at the child, at the simple wisdom in his young face. His voice when he spoke was raw. I'm sorry, son. I'm so sorry. It's okay, Marcus said. Grandpa takes care of me now. And he says Mom would want me to be happy. He squeezed Vincent's hand. I bet your daughter wants you to be happy too. Sarah's eyes moved between Vincent and her phone, seeing the same truth that had been staring at her for 3 years. This was why he read the astronomy book every day. This was why he came to the library at opening time with such regularity. This was why he never caused problems, never asked for help, never drew attention. He was trying to disappear while staying close enough to catch glimpses of a world he'd left behind. She pulled up another page on her phone, this one showing Dr. Elena Harlow's recent social media post. There was a photograph of her at a podium speaking at a medical conference. The caption read, "Speaking today about pediatric oncology research at the annual medical summit. Thinking of my father as always. 6 years searching, never giving up hope." Vincent's breath caught when he saw the image. Elena looked so much like her mother. The same determined expression, the same compassion in her eyes, the same strength that had carried them through deployments and distance, and all the small fears that came with loving a soldier. George had moved closer, his voice gentle. "Son, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Are you really Vincent Harlow, the Ranger sniper from Kuna Province? Or are you someone who knew the story well enough to claim it?" Vincent's hand tightened on Marcus's fingers. The boy didn't flinch, just held on with steady pressure that said he wasn't going anywhere. "I'm Vincent Harlow," the old man said quietly. "Call sign Saber. 75th Ranger Regiment, 2nd Battalion." He closed his eyes. "Eli Chun was my spotter and my friend. He died in my arms on October 12th, 2006, at 0943 hours. His voice was precise now, falling into the cadence of an after-action report. "I held that ridge for 14 more hours. 73 confirmed eliminations. All 11 Rangers extracted alive." George's eyes had filled with tears. "I know," he whispered. "I processed your medical evacuation. I saw what they pulled out of your leg. Saw the surgeons argue about amputation." He paused. "I saw the Medal of Honor paperwork, too, before you refused it." Whitmore had gone very quiet, his face pale. Around the room, other veterans had stopped their conversations, drawn by the weight of what they were witnessing. Phones were still recording, capturing every moment. Sarah made a decision. She pulled up a contact on her phone, one she'd saved 3 months ago after Elena Harlow's foundation had reached out to every VA facility and homeless shelter in the region with Vincent's photograph and a request for information. Sarah had seen the flyer, had recognized the man from her library, and had struggled with the ethics of calling without his permission. Now, watching Vincent break apart in front of witnesses, watching 6 years of carefully constructed isolation crumble, she knew waiting for permission was the wrong choice. Before she could dial, Vincent's sleeve shifted. He'd been rubbing his arm unconsciously, a nervous gesture that had pulled the fabric up past his elbow. The tattoo was fully visible now, not just the coordinates and initials. The full design showed a Ranger scroll at the top, the coordinates and date below it, Eli Chin's initials rendered in memorial script, and, at the bottom, 2 names Sarah hadn't been able to see before. Elena Maria Harlow. Catherine and Harlow. His wife's name, his daughter's name, inked permanently into skin above the scar tissue from the shrapnel that had nearly killed him. George saw them too. His hand rose to his mouth, his shoulders shaking. "Oh, son," he breathed. "You've been carrying them all this time." Vincent looked down at his arm, at the names he'd had inked 2 weeks after his wife's funeral, the day before he'd left his daughter's hospital bedside and disappeared. The tattoo artist had been a Marine veteran who'd understood without questions why a broken man needed to carry his family on the same arm that bore his fallen brother's initials. "I couldn't save Catherine," Vincent said, his voice breaking completely. "She was strong and beautiful and good, and I couldn't save her. All those years training to protect people, to eliminate threats, to keep my brothers alive, and I was useless when it mattered most." He wiped his eyes with his free hand. "I couldn't even look at Elena without seeing everything I'd failed to protect." Marcus's voice was small but firm. "My grandpa says we can't protect people from everything, that sometimes bad things happen and it's not our fault." Vincent looked at the boy, at the wisdom in his young eyes born from his own loss. "Your grandfather is a smart man." George nodded, his own eyes wet. The boy's right. Cancer isn't an enemy you can shoot, isn't a threat you can eliminate. Some battles can't be won with training and determination. Whitmore had backed away from the group, his face ashen. He seemed to be processing the magnitude of what he'd done, the public humiliation he'd inflicted on a man carrying wounds that went far deeper than a damaged leg. Sarah held up her phone. "Vincent, I'm going to call your daughter. Not asking permission anymore. Just telling you. She's been looking for 6 years. She deserves to know you're alive." Vincent's protest died in his throat when Marcus squeezed his hand again. The boy looked up at him with absolute certainty. "You should talk to her, mister. I bet she's not mad. I bet she just misses you." Sarah dialed before Vincent could object. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, a woman's voice answered, professional and warm. "Dr. Harlow speaking." Sarah took a breath. "Dr. Harlow, my name is Sarah Brennan. I'm the director of the Riverside Public Library. I'm calling because I think I've found your father." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Then, very quietly, barely a whisper, "Is he alive?" "Please tell me he's alive." "He's alive," Sarah said. "He's here, at the library." She held the phone out to Vincent. "She wants to talk to you." Vincent stared at the phone like it was a live grenade. His hand shook so badly he didn't trust himself to hold it. 6 years of running. 6 years of hiding. 6 years of convincing himself that disappearing was the kindest thing he could do. And now his daughter's voice, desperate and hopeful and alive, coming through a speaker asking if he was really there. Marcus took the phone from Sarah's hand and held it up to Vincent's ear. "Talk to her," the boy said simply. Vincent's voice, when it came, was barely audible. "Elena, baby, I'm so sorry." The sound that came through the phone was something between a sob and a gasp. "Dad, oh God, Dad, where are you? Are you hurt? Please don't hang up. Please." Vincent's knees buckled. George caught him, guided him into a chair with the gentle efficiency of someone who had helped broken men before. Marcus climbed into the chair next to him, still holding Vincent's hand, his presence a small anchor in a moment that threatened to sweep everything away. "I'm at the library," Vincent managed. "The Riverside Public Library. I'm okay." His voice cracked. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry I left." Elena's words came in a rush. 6 years of searching and grief and desperate hope pouring through the connection. "Don't apologize. Just stay there. Don't move. I'm coming right now. I'm 20 minutes away." 20 minutes, Dad. Just please, please don't leave." Vincent closed his eyes, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I won't leave. I promise." The line went quiet for a moment, except for Elena's ragged breathing. Then, softer, "You promise. You really promise. Because I've spent 6 years imagining this call, and I need to know you'll be there when I arrive." "I promise," Vincent said, his voice steady despite the tears. "On Elia's memory. On your mother's memory. I'll be here." Sarah moved to give them privacy, but stayed close enough to intervene if needed. Around the room, the other veterans had formed a loose perimeter, a protective circle that spoke of brotherhood that transcended individual service. They didn't know Vincent's full story yet, but they recognized one of their own in crisis and responded with the instinct that came from shared experience. Whitmore had retreated to the far corner of the room, his phone in his hand, his face ashen. He seemed to be trying to calculate the damage, to assess how badly this would reflect on him when the videos currently being recorded made their way online. George knelt beside Vincent's chair, his hand on the old man's shoulder. "You did good, son. Hardest thing in the world is accepting help, admitting you need people." He squeezed gently. "But you're doing it now. That's what matters." Marcus leaned against Vincent's side, his young face serious. "Is she really coming? Your daughter?" "She's really coming," Vincent whispered. He looked down at the boy. "I haven't seen her in 6 years. What if she's angry? What if she looks at me and realizes I'm not worth finding?" Marcus considered this with the gravity only children could bring to simple truths. "My mom used to tell me that love doesn't work like that. That when you love someone, you don't stop just because they're sad or scared or broken." He tilted his head. "I think your daughter loves you like that." Elena's voice came through the phone again. "Dad, are you still there?" "I'm here," Vincent said. "Tell me what happened," Elena said. "After Mom died." "Why did you leave?" Vincent's hand found his leg, fingers tracing the scar through worn denim. The gesture had become automatic over the years, a physical reminder of promises kept and prices paid. "I couldn't function," he said quietly. "Every time I looked at you, I saw her. Your eyes, her smile, the way you stood at her funeral like you were trying to be strong for both of us." He paused. "I failed her, Elena. Spent 20 years learning to protect people, and I couldn't protect the one person who mattered most." "Cancer isn't an enemy you can fight with tactics," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's not a threat you can eliminate. Mom knew that. She told me before she died that you would blame yourself, that you would try to carry guilt that wasn't yours to carry." Vincent's breath caught. "She knew. She knew you," Elena said. "Knew how you thought, how you processed loss. She made me promise to find you if you ran. Made me promise not to give up." A soft sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "She said you'd go to ground like you were on a mission, that you'd try to disappear. But she also said you'd stay close enough to watch, that you couldn't fully let go." "The astronomy book," Vincent whispered. His free hand moved to his coat pocket, to the worn text he'd carried for 16 years. "Eli's book. I read it every day. Same bench. Same time. Talking to ghosts." Sarah had been listening, pieces clicking into place. The regularity, the routine, the way Vincent always sat near windows where he could see the street. He'd been maintaining operational awareness even in his exile, staying close enough to monitor without engaging. Elena's voice softened. "Dad, I need you to listen to me. Really listen. You didn't fail Mom. You didn't fail me. You survived something terrible and you did what you thought was right. But I've spent 6 years with a hole in my life where my father should be. 6 years wondering if you were alive, if you were safe, if you knew I was looking." "I knew," Vincent said. "Saw the foundation you built, the work you're doing, saving kids." He wiped his eyes. "You became everything good, everything your mother hoped for. You didn't need me for that. I needed you for me," Elena said, her voice breaking. "Not for success or accomplishment or career. I needed my father, the man who used to read to me before deployments, who taught me constellations, who told me stories about a friend named Eli who loved the stars." Vincent's control shattered completely. The walls he'd maintained for 6 years, the distance he'd convinced himself was mercy, the isolation he'd worn like armor, all of it collapsed under the weight of his daughter's love. Sobs racked his frame, 6 years of grief and guilt and desperate loneliness pouring out in front of strangers who had become witnesses to his breaking. Marcus wrapped both arms around Vincent's waist, holding on with the fierce determination of a child who understood loss. George's hand remained on his shoulder, steady and grounding. Sarah stood nearby, tears streaming down her own face as she watched a father and daughter begin to bridge 6 years of absence with words neither had allowed themselves to speak. "I'm broken," Vincent managed. "I'm homeless and damaged, and I don't know how to be your father anymore." "Then we'll figure out together," Elena said. "We'll start small. Coffee. Conversation. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be there." Her voice gained strength. "I'm pulling into the library parking lot now. I'm coming inside. And Dad, I need you to promise me one more thing." "Anything," Vincent whispered. "Promise me you'll let me help. That you'll stop running. That you'll give us a chance to be a family again." Vincent looked around the room. at Marcus holding on to him with absolute trust, at George watching him with the understanding of a fellow soldier, at Sarah offering help without judgment, at the other veterans forming their protective circle, at Whitmore shrinking in the corner, finally understanding the magnitude of the man he'd tried to humiliate. "I promise," Vincent said. The community room door opened. A woman in her late 20s stood in the doorway, her face tear-streaked, her eyes scanning the room with desperate intensity. She wore professional attire, a doctor's bearing in her posture, but none of that mattered when her gaze found Vincent. "Dad," she breathed. Vincent tried to stand. His damaged leg protested, 6 years of rough living having taken their toll on the old injury. George helped him up, supporting his weight as Vincent took one step, then another, closing the distance between himself and the daughter he'd convinced himself he'd lost forever. Elena met him halfway. When she wrapped her arms around him, Vincent felt something inside him that had been frozen for 6 years begin to thaw. She was taller than he remembered, stronger. Her embrace was fierce and desperate, and filled with love he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve. "I've got you," she whispered into his shoulder. "I've got you, and I'm not letting go." Vincent's arms came up slowly, hesitantly, then tightened around her. For the first time in 6 years, he allowed himself to hold on instead of letting go, to accept comfort instead of seeking isolation, to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was worth finding after all. Behind them, Marcus watched with a smile that held wisdom beyond his years. George wiped his eyes, his hand over his heart in an unconscious gesture of respect. Sarah stood with her phone still recording, documenting not for social media, but for the moment when Vincent would need proof that this was real. And in the corner, Gerald Whitmore finally understood what it meant to witness grace he had no part in earning. Elena held her father for a long moment, her arms tight around him, her face pressed against his shoulder. She could feel how thin he'd become, could smell the library soap in the street where that no amount of washing could fully remove. None of it mattered. He was alive. He was here. He was real. When she finally pulled back, her hands moved to his face, cupping his weathered cheeks, studying the lines that 6 years of rough living had carved into features she'd memorized from childhood. Her doctor's eyes cataloged the signs of malnutrition, exposure, inadequate medical care. But beneath all that, she saw her father, the man who had taught her to be brave. "We're going to fix this," she said firmly. "All of it. Housing, medical care, everything you need." Her voice softened. "But first, I just need to look at you, to know this is real." "It's real," Vincent whispered. His hands covered hers, holding them against his face. "I'm sorry I made you search. Sorry I made you worry. You're here now," Elena said. "That's what matters." She glanced around the room, seeing the gathered witnesses for the first time. The veterans watching with wet eyes. The young boy who had somehow been part of bringing her father back. The library director whose call had made this reunion possible. George stepped forward, his bearing formal despite his civilian clothes. "Mom, I'm George Patterson, retired Army sergeant. I knew your father's story before today, before I knew it was him." He paused. "Your father is a genuine American hero. What he did in Afghanistan saved 11 lives and should never have been forgotten." Elena's eyes widened. She turned back to Vincent. "The operation, the one you never talked about, the one that earned you the Medal of Honor you refused." Her voice caught. "Dad, I tried to get information through FOIA requests. Everything's still classified." Vincent's hand moved unconsciously to his arm, to the tattoo hidden beneath his sleeve. "Classified for good reason. Some things are better left buried. Not when those things define who you are," Elena said. She looked at George. "Tell me what you know, please." George glanced at Vincent, asking silent permission. Vincent closed his eyes, nodded once. October 12th, 2006, George began. A Ranger platoon walked into an ambush in Kunar province. 3-sided attack. 47 insurgents. No air support due to weather. The platoon was pinned down with casualties mounting. He looked at Vincent with something approaching reverence. "Your father and his spotter were inserted on high ground 1,200 meters out. Their mission was to buy time until extraction could arrive. The room had gone completely silent. Even Whitmore had stopped his quiet retreat, frozen by the weight of what he was hearing. 12 hours into the operation, a mortar hit their position. George continued. The spotter, Specialist Eli Chun, was killed instantly. Your father suffered catastrophic leg injuries that should have ended the mission. He paused. Instead, he stayed on the rifle for 6 more hours. Alone, bleeding, in excruciating pain. He held that position until every single ranger made it to the extraction helicopters. Elena's hands had moved to her mouth. Oh God. Oh Dad. 73 confirmed eliminations, George said, against an organized enemy force, at ranges that pushed the limits of the weapon system, all while suffering from blood loss and shock that would have incapacitated most men. He turned to face the room. The Medal of Honor paperwork was submitted. Command wanted to recognize the most extraordinary act of individual heroism they'd seen in a generation. But you refused, Elena said, looking at her father. Why? Vincent's voice was barely audible. Eli died in my arms. How could I accept recognition for surviving when he didn't? Sarah had been standing nearby, her phone in her hand. She'd been searching military databases, cross-referencing what George had said. Now she held up her screen, showing a declassified commendation citation from 2007. It's here. Sergeant Vincent Harlow, call sign Saber. Recommended for Medal of Honor. Downgraded to Silver Star when the recipient refused the higher decoration. Elena took the phone, reading the citation through tears. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidation at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. Her voice broke. Dad, this says you single-handedly prevented the annihilation of an entire platoon. I did my job, Vincent said. Same as any ranger would have done. No, George said firmly. Not the same. What you did was legendary. I was epigram when they brought you in. The surgeons worked on your leg for 11 hours. They said you'd never walk again. Said the nerve damage was too extensive. His voice filled with emotion. 3 months later, you were back on active duty with a medical waiver because you refused to quit. Elena stared at her father. You deployed again. After that injury. Vincent nodded slowly. Twice more. Until your mother got sick. Then the only mission that mattered was being there for her. And when she died, you blamed yourself for not being able to save her the way you'd save those rangers, Elena said, understanding finally falling into place. You thought because you could hold a position for 20 hours with a shattered leg, you should have been able to fight cancer. Vincent's silence was answer enough. Marcus had moved closer, looking up at Vincent with awe. You really are a hero, like in the movies. No, son, Vincent said gently. Heroes are what people call you when you live and your friends don't. When you come home and they stay behind. Real heroism is getting up every day and choosing to keep going when everything in you wants to quit. The boy considered this. Like you did. You kept going even when you were sad about your wife. Vincent's expression softened. Like I tried to do, until I couldn't anymore. But you're going to try again now, Marcus said. Because your daughter found you, and she's going to help. Elena knelt beside the boy, her eyes meeting his. Thank you for being kind to my father, for holding his hand when he needed it. He needed a lot, Marcus said with the blunt honesty of childhood. Mr. Whitmore was being really mean. All eyes turned to the chairman, who had remained silent in his corner. His face was pale, his phone clutched in trembling hands. The videos were already spreading, Sarah knew. In the age of social media, Vincent's humiliation and subsequent revelation had probably already reached thousands of viewers. Whitmore cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. I need to apologize. I made terrible assumptions, said unforgivable things. His eyes met Vincent's. I had no idea who you were, what you'd done, what you'd lost. Vincent's voice was tired, but not angry. You saw a homeless man. That's what I am. The rest is just history. No, George said firmly. You're a Silver Star recipient. A décoraté de combat vétéran. A father. A survivor. The fact that you're also homeless is a failure of the system, not a reflection of your worth. Sarah stepped forward. Vincent, We have resources. The VA has programs specifically for homeless veterans. I've been trying to get you connected for 3 years. Elena's hand tightened on her father's arm. He's not going to be homeless anymore. He's coming home with me today. We'll figure out the rest together. Vincent looked at his daughter, at the determination in her eyes that mirrored her mother's. Baby, I can't just move into your life. You have a career, a foundation. You don't need your broken father disrupting everything you've built. I need my father, Elena said firmly. Period. Everything else is negotiable. She glanced around at the gathered witnesses. And apparently, I'm not the only one who thinks you're worth fighting for. George nodded. Sir, the veteran community takes care of our own. You held the line for 11 Rangers in 2006. We'll hold the line for you now. One of the other veterans in the room stepped forward, a man in his 50s wearing a 2nd Battalion Ranger Regiment cap. His voice was rough with emotion. Saber, I was at Benning when your story reached the battalion. We used your operation as a case study in advanced marksmanship. Every Ranger knows your name. Vincent's expression showed shock. That's not possible. I refused all publicity. Refused the Medal of Honor specifically to avoid attention. The military knows, the Ranger said. Every special operations soldier knows what you did, what you sacrificed. Your call sign is legend, sir. Even if the civilian world never learned your name. Whitmore had listened to all this with growing horror. The videos were going viral. Sarah could see it in his face. Library board chairman humiliates Medal of Honor nominee on anniversary of his spotter's death. The headline would write itself. I'll resign from the board, Whitmore said quietly. Effective immediately. It's the least I can do. Vincent shook his head. That's not necessary. You made a mistake. We all make mistakes. Not mistakes like that, George said coldly. Not publicly humiliating a man for being homeless when he earned that condition through service and sacrifice and grief. Elena stood, her arm around her father's shoulders, supporting his weight as his damaged leg trembled from standing too long. Gentlemen, I appreciate your support. But right now, my father needs medical attention, food, rest, and time. We can sort out consequences and apologies later. She was right. Sarah knew. Vincent was swaying on his feet, 6 years of malnutrition and exposure catching up with him now that the adrenaline of reunion was fading. Let me call an ambulance. No hospitals, Vincent said automatically. Then, seeing Elena's expression, he amended. Please. Not yet. Then my car, Elena said. I'm taking you to my place. We'll get a doctor friend of mine to come check you out there. Her voice was gentle, but left no room for argument. You don't get to refuse help anymore, Dad. That part of your life is over. The videos had gone viral within the hour. Sarah watched them spread across social media platforms as Elena helped Vincent toward the parking lot. His limp more pronounced now that exhaustion and emotion had stripped away the compensatory mechanisms he'd developed over years of survival. The footage was damning in its clarity. Whitmore's contemptuous dismissal. Vincent's quiet dignity. The moment when the truth had begun to emerge. One video in particular had already reached 500,000 views. It showed Vincent's face as Elena wrapped her arms around him, the exact moment when 6 years of walls had crumbled. The caption read, Homeless vet publicly humiliated at library event revealed to be Silver Star recipient. His daughter had been searching for 6 years. Comments poured in by the thousands, a mixture of outrage at Whitmore's treatment and overwhelming support for Vincent. George stood with Sarah in the parking lot, watching Elena guide her father into a clean sedan. Marcus had followed them out, his small hand still clutching the astronomy book that had fallen from Vincent's coat pocket during the embrace. Wait, the boy called. You forgot this. Vincent turned, saw the worn text in Marcus's hands. For a moment, his expression showed the conflict of a man who had carried that book as both anchor and penance for 16 years. Then he reached down, his movements gentle. You keep it, son. Read it. Learn about the stars. He paused. My friend Eli would have wanted someone to appreciate it. Marcus clutched the book to his chest. I'll take good care of it. I promise. His young face was serious. And I'll learn all the constellations so I can show you next time. Next time, Vincent repeated softly, as if testing the concept that there would be a future, that he wasn't disappearing again. Yeah, next time. Elena helped her father into the passenger seat, her movements efficient and caring. She'd already called 2 of her doctor colleagues, had arranged for a full medical workup at her home, had started compiling the list of things Vincent would need. But first, she just needed to get him somewhere safe. Somewhere he could rest without watching exits and calculating threat vectors. Before they could pull away, a silver SUV pulled into the parking lot with the kind of aggressive precision that spoke of military training. The door opened, and a man in his 60s stepped out, his bearing unmistakably command despite civilian clothes. He wore a 2nd Battalion Ranger Regiment cap, and his eyes scanned the scene with tactical efficiency before landing on Vincent's face through the car window. The man's expression shifted from curiosity to shock to something approaching awe. He crossed the parking lot in long strides, moving past Sarah and George without acknowledgement. When he reached the sedan, he stood at attention. "Saber," the man said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Sir, it's an honor." Vincent stared through the window, recognition slowly dawning. His voice when he spoke was hoarse. Blake Morrison." The man's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, sir." He gestured to the ranger cap. "2nd Battalion. Retired now. Lieutenant Colonel. But I was 1st Lieutenant when you saved my life." Elena had gotten out of the driver's seat, moving around the car to stand beside the stranger. "You're one of the 11. One of the Rangers from the valley." Blake nodded, unable to take his eyes off Vincent. "I was platoon leader, 24 years old, and certain I was about to watch my entire platoon die." He pressed his hand against the car window. This man held a position for 20 hours with injuries that would have killed most people. Took out 73 hostiles. Gave us the time we needed to survive. George had moved closer, his face showing recognition. "Morrison, I remember processing your platoon's evac. You had a through hand throw in your shoulder. Kept fighting anyway." Blake's laugh was bitter. "A shoulder wound. That was nothing compared to what Saber was carrying." His voice dropped. "I was there when they loaded him onto the helicopter. Saw what the shrapnel had done to his leg. Saw him refuse amputation even though the medics said he'd die if they tried to save it." Vincent had opened the car door, was attempting to stand. Elena and Blake both moved to help him, supporting his weight as his damaged legs struggled to bear it. "You named your son after Eli," Vincent said quietly. Blake's face crumpled. "Elijah Morrison. He's 16 now. I tell him about the man who died so I could come home to be his father." His voice broke. "I tell him about the sniper who refused to leave us even when staying meant dying." "You would have done the same," Vincent said. "No, sir," Blake said firmly. "I was a scared lieutenant trying to keep it together. You were a ranger who had already proven himself in 3 deployments. What you did that day was beyond courage, beyond duty." His hand found Vincent's shoulder. "And then you disappeared. For 6 years, the battalion tried to find you. We wanted to honor you properly. To thank you." "I didn't want thanks," Vincent said. "I wanted to forget." Elena's voice was gentle but firm. "Dad, maybe it's time to stop trying to forget. Maybe it's time to remember the good parts too, not just the loss." Sarah had approached with her phone. "Colonel Morrison, the videos from today are going viral. The entire country is learning about Vincent's story, about what happened to him, how he was treated." Blake's expression hardened. "I saw. That's why I came. I live 20 minutes from here. When I saw the video and recognized the call sign being mentioned, I had to verify. Had to know if it was really Saber." His eyes moved to Vincent. "Sir, you need to know what your actions meant. All 11 of us survived that day. We all made it home. 3 of us stayed in, made careers, honored what you taught us about never quitting. The others are successful civilians. Teachers, engineers, fathers." His voice gained strength. "You didn't just save 11 lives. You saved all the lives that came after. All the children, all the grandchildren, all the good those men went on to do in the world." Vincent's breath caught. "I never thought about it like that." "You should have," Blake said. "You earned that Medal of Honor, sir. The fact that you refused it doesn't change what you did. Doesn't change that you're a legend in the Ranger community." George stepped forward. "The VA has been looking for you too. Your benefits, your medical care, everything you're entitled to as a decorated combat veteran. It's all waiting. Vincent looked overwhelmed, his hand gripping Elena's arm for support. I don't know how to accept this. Any of this. One step at a time, Elena said. First, we get you medical care. Then food and rest. Everything else can wait. Blake reached into his wallet, pulled out a card. This is my personal number. When you're ready, when you've had time to process, I want to arrange a reunion. All 11 of us. We've been talking about it for years, but couldn't find you to make it happen. His eyes were bright. We want to say thank you. Properly. With witnesses. Marcus had moved closer, still clutching the astronomy book. Are you really going to be okay now? You're not going to be homeless anymore. Vincent looked down at the boy, managed something approaching a smile. I think so, son. Thanks to people who refused to let me disappear. The gathering in the parking lot had grown. More veterans from the library event had come out, forming a loose circle of respect around Vincent and Elena. Phones were still recording, still documenting, but the tone had shifted from witnessing humiliation to witnessing restoration. One veteran, a woman in her 40s wearing a Navy veteran cap, stepped forward. Sir, I don't know you. Never served with you. But I've been homeless too. Lived in my car for 8 months after my discharge. She met Vincent's eyes. Seeing you get found, seeing you accept help, it matters. It shows the rest of us that maybe we're not beyond saving either. Vincent's voice was rough. You're never beyond saving. Never. I just forgot that for a while. Sarah had been monitoring the social media response on her phone. The story had been picked up by news outlets now. Decorated Ranger found living homeless after 6 years. Daughter's foundation finally locates father who saved 11 lives. The narrative was shifting from individual tragedy to systemic failure. Questions being raised about how a Silver Star recipient could fall through the cracks so completely. Elena saw Sarah's screen, saw the headlines forming. This is going to get bigger, isn't it? The media attention. Probably, Sarah said. Your father's story touches too many raw nerves. Veteran homelessness, PTSD, grief, the failure of support systems. Vincent's expression showed panic. I don't want attention. Don't want to be a story. Elena squeezed his hand. You don't get to decide that anymore, Dad. Your story is already out there. But maybe that's okay. Maybe other veterans who are hiding will see what happened today and realize they don't have to hide anymore. Blake nodded. Sir, you taught us never to leave a ranger behind. Today, you stopped leaving yourself behind. That matters. That's worth sharing. George had pulled out his own phone, was making calls. Within minutes, he connected with local VA representatives, homeless veteran advocates, ranger community leaders. The machinery of support was beginning to turn, systems that should have caught Vincent 6 years ago, finally engaging. Marcus tugged on Elena's sleeve. Is your dad going to be famous now? Elena looked at her father, saw the exhaustion and fear and fragile hope in his weathered face. I think he already was, in the ways that matter. Now everyone else just gets to know what the Rangers have known all along. Vincent leaned heavily against the car, his leg throbbing, his body demanding rest. He denied it for too long. But for the first time in 6 years, he wasn't alone. His daughter stood beside him. Veterans who understood his service surrounded him. A community that refused to let him fall was forming in real time. Blake stood at attention one final time. Welcome home, Saber. It's been too long. By the time Elena pulled into her driveway, Vincent's story had reached national news. Her phone had been ringing constantly during the 20-minute drive. Calls from media outlets, veteran organizations, and military advocacy groups, all requesting interviews and information. She'd silenced it after the 5th call, her focus entirely on getting her father inside and stable. Vincent had been silent during the drive, his eyes fixed on the passing streets, as if memorizing a world he'd convinced himself he'd never be part of again. When Elena's house came into view, a modest 2-story in a quiet neighborhood, he made a small sound that might have been surprise or grief or relief. You live here, he said quietly. For 3 years, Elena replied. I bought it with my first attending physician's salary. She pulled into the garage. There's a guest room that's been empty since I moved in. It's yours now for as long as you need it. Vincent's hands were shaking as he unbuckled his seatbelt. Baby, I can't just move in. You have a life, a career. You don't need your homeless father disrupting everything. Elena turned to face him, her eyes fierce. Stop. Just stop. You're my father. You held a mountain for 20 hours to save people you didn't know. You can accept a bedroom from your daughter. Inside, Elena's home was warmly furnished, photographs on the walls showing her journey through medical school and residency. Vincent's eyes caught on one frame in particular. A picture of him in his dress uniform, Elena at 8 years old on his shoulders, both of them laughing. It had been taken during a base family day, years before Afghanistan, before Eli, before Catherine's death. I remember that day, Vincent whispered. You made me carry you around the entire parade ground. You pretended to complain, but I could tell you loved it, Elena said softly. She guided him to the couch. Seat. I have a friend coming by in 30 minutes to check you out medically. Until then, you're eating and drinking water. She disappeared into the kitchen, returning with soup and bread and water. Vincent stared at the food as if uncertain whether he was allowed to take it. Elena sat beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Eat, Dad. Please. He ate slowly, each bite seeming to require conscious effort. 6 years of survival eating had made regular meals feel foreign. Elena watched him with her doctor's eyes, cataloging the signs of prolonged malnutrition, the way his hands trembled slightly, the hollow quality to his breathing that suggested respiratory issues from exposure. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen, and her expression shifted. Dad, I need to show you something. She pulled up a news website. The headline dominated the page. Silver Star Ranger found after 6 years missing. Daughter's search finally succeeds. Below it, the library video had been viewed over 2 million times. But it wasn't just a reunion video anymore. News outlets had pulled Vincent's military records, his commendations, his service history. There was his official Army photo from 2006, young and strong and whole. His Silver Star citation, the language formal but unable to hide the extraordinary nature of his actions. Quotes from Blake Morrison and the other Rangers he'd saved, all of whom had been tracked down by journalists in the past 3 hours. The entire country knows now, Elena said gently. Your service, your sacrifice. What happened to you? Vincent stared at the screen, his face pale. This isn't what I wanted. What did you want? Elena asked. To be invisible, Vincent said. To not hurt anyone anymore with my presence. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Dad, you never hurt anyone with your presence. Your absence hurt. Your disappearance hurt. But you, just being you, that's never been the problem. The doorbell rang. Elena's colleague, Dr. Michael Torres, stood on the porch with a medical bag and an expression of professional concern. Elena had briefed him on the situation, enough for him to come prepared. Michael worked efficiently, checking Vincent's vitals, examining the leg injury, noting the signs of chronic homelessness with the detached compassion of an experienced physician. When he was done, he sat back with a sigh. You're malnourished, dehydrated, and showing signs of chronic bronchitis, probably from exposure, Michael said. Your leg has significant scar tissue and what looks like retained shrapnel that's been causing ongoing inflammation. You need antibiotics, proper nutrition, physical therapy, and probably surgery to remove the foreign material that's been grinding against your bones for 16 years. Vincent's voice was hoarse. I can't afford any of that. You have full VA benefits as a decorated combat veteran, Michael said. And your daughter has already made it clear she's not asking your permission about treatment. He smiled slightly. My advice is to stop fighting and let people help you. After Michael left, promising to coordinate with VA physicians, Elena sat beside her father on the couch. Her phone continued buzzing with notifications. The story had exploded beyond anything she'd imagined. Dad, there's more, she said quietly. She pulled up another article, this one from a military news site. Former platoon members organize reunion for Ranger who saved them. Blake Morrison had moved fast. Within hours of the parking lot encounter, he'd contacted all 10 surviving members of his platoon. All of them wanted to see Vincent, to thank him properly, to show him what his sacrifice had meant. There's a quote from one of them, a man named Carlos Rodriguez who now taught high school history in Texas. Sergeant Harlow gave me the chance to become a father, to teach kids, to contribute to my community. I owe him everything. We all do. Vincent's breath caught. Carlos. He was the youngest, 19 years old, kept talking about his girlfriend back home. He married her, Elena said softly. They have 3 kids. He credits you with making that possible. She scrolled further, showing him photos. The 11 Rangers, now in their late 30s and early 40s, successful and alive because Vincent had refused to abandon his position. Teachers, engineers, police officers, business owners, fathers and husbands, and community members. This is what you did, Elena said. This is the ripple effect of holding that ridge. Not just 11 lives. Dozens more. Maybe hundreds when you count all the students Carlos has taught, all the buildings his platoon mates have designed, all the good they've put into the world. Vincent wiped his eyes with shaking hands. I just did my job. No, Elena said firmly. You did something extraordinary. And then you punish yourself for it, because Eli didn't get to come home too. She took his hand. Dad, Eli wouldn't want this. He wouldn't want you living under bridges and disappearing from the people who love you. I know, Vincent whispered. I know he wouldn't. But knowing it and believing I deserve better are different things. Elena's phone rang again. This time, she answered. It was Sarah from the library. Her voice was excited and slightly overwhelmed. Elena, you need to see this. Whitmore just held a press conference. Elena put the phone on speaker. Sarah continued, her words tumbling out. He announced his resignation from the library board. Full apology. Promised to donate to veteran homeless organizations. But that's not all. The library board held an emergency meeting. They're renaming the community room the Vincent Harlow Memorial Community Room, in honor of your father and Eli Chun. Vincent's face showed shock. They can't do that. They already did, Sarah said. The vote was unanimous. And Elena, there's more. The veteran community is organizing a proper ceremony. They want to present your father with the commendations he earned. Publicly, with all the Rangers he saved in attendance. Vincent looked at Elena, panic in his eyes. I can't do that. Can't stand in front of people and accept things I don't deserve. Elena squeezed his hand. You're going to learn to accept help, Dad. Starting now. Starting small. But yes, eventually you're going to stand in front of those Rangers and let them say thank you. Because they need it as much as you do. Sarah's voice came through the speaker again. There's something else you should know. The videos from today. They've sparked a national conversation about veteran homelessness. Congress members are talking about it. Advocacy groups are using your father's story to push for better support systems. What happened to Vincent? It's becoming a catalyst for change. Vincent's voice was barely audible. I never wanted to be a symbol. You don't get to choose that, Elena said gently. But maybe that's okay. Maybe your story can help other veterans who are hiding the way you are hiding. Show them there's a way back. The evening news played on Elena's television, showing the library footage interspersed with interviews from the Rangers Vincent had saved. Blake Morrison spoke to cameras with tears in his eyes, describing the man who had sacrificed everything to give them a future. The ticker at the bottom read, National Hero Found Living Homeless. Daughter never stopped searching. Vincent watched it all with the expression of a man seeing his life from outside himself, unable to reconcile the narrative being created with the reality of 6 years spent trying to disappear. But Elena saw something else in his face too. A crack in the armor he'd built. A tentative possibility that maybe, just maybe, the world was right and he was wrong about his own worth. Tomorrow we start physical therapy, Elena said. Next week, we address the medical issues. The week after, we start connecting you with the VA benefits you should have been receiving all along. She met his eyes. And whenever you're ready, we let those Rangers say thank you. Vincent nodded slowly, exhaustion finally overwhelming him. Elena, he said quietly, I don't know how to do this. How'd he found? How to stop running? Elena helped him stand, guided him toward the guest room she'd kept ready without knowing why. One day at a time, Dad, just like you taught me. One step, one breath, one choice to keep going. In the room, Vincent sat on the edge of a real bed for the first time in 6 years. Elena pulled the covers back, helped him lie down despite his protest that he was too dirty, that he needed to shower first. Tomorrow, she said firmly. Tonight, you just rest. She sat with him as his eyes closed, as exhaustion pulled him under into sleep that was finally, tentatively, safe. On her phone, the notifications continued. The story spreading. The nation learning. The Rangers organizing. The system finally, belatedly, beginning to respond. But for now, in this moment, Elena just watched her father sleep and whispered the words she'd been saying for 6 years to an empty room. Welcome home, Dad. I've got you now. 3 weeks had passed since the library. 3 weeks of medical appointments, physical therapy sessions, and slowly learning to accept help without feeling like a burden. Vincent had gained 12 pounds, his bronchitis had cleared with antibiotics, and the VA had finally scheduled surgery to remove the shrapnel that had been embedded in his leg for 16 years. But today was different. Today was the reunion Blake Morrison had organized with the precision of a military operation. 11 Rangers, now scattered across the country, had all converged on a VFW hall in downtown Riverside. News cameras waited outside. The story had grown beyond anything Vincent could have imagined, becoming a symbol for veteran advocacy groups and homelessness awareness campaigns. Elena stood beside her father in the VFW parking lot, her hand on his arm. You don't have to do this if you're not ready. Vincent looked at the building, at the American flag flying above it, at the vehicles filling the lot. His leg ached despite the physical therapy. His hands trembled despite 3 weeks of regular meals. But something in his chest felt different. Lighter, as if the weight he'd been carrying had started, finally, to shift. I need to do this, he said quietly. For Eli. For them. Maybe for me too. Inside, the VFW hall had been transformed. Photographs lined the walls showing the Rangers from 2006, young faces in combat gear, and updated images from their current lives. Families, children, accomplishments, all the futures made possible by one man's refusal to abandon his position. Blake Morrison stood near the entrance in his dress uniform, his bearing formal despite retirement. When Vincent entered, Blake called the room to attention. Every person stood, veterans and civilians alike, a wave of respect that made Vincent's breath catch. At ease, Vincent said automatically, the command coming from muscle memory. Then, quieter, please. The Rangers approached one by one, each greeting carrying the weight of 16 years and a debt they'd spent their lives trying to repay. Carlos Rodriguez, the high school teacher, embraced Vincent with tears streaming down his face. I have 3 kids, sir. My oldest is named Eli. Because of you. David Park, now a civil engineer, shook Vincent's hand with both of his own. I design bridges, buildings that will stand for generations. You gave me the time to learn how. James Wilson, a police officer, his voice rough. I save lives now, sir. Every day, because you saved mine first. One by one they came. 11 men, no longer the terrified Rangers pinned in a valley, but fathers and husbands and contributors, each carrying the knowledge that they existed because Vincent had stayed when leaving would have been the rational choice. When they had all greeted him, Blake gestured to a table at the front of the room. Sir, we have something for you. Something that's 16 years overdue. On the table lay a framed Silver Star citation, Vincent's official commendation matted and preserved. Beside it, a shadow box containing his original dog tags, photographs from Afghanistan, and a handwritten letter on Army letterhead from 2007. Blake lifted the letter carefully. This is from Lieutenant General Marcus Chun. Ilyich Untle. He wrote it after the Medal of Honor was downgraded to Silver Star per your refusal. He cleared his throat and began to read. Sergeant Harlow, you have denied the nation the opportunity to recognize your extraordinary heroism in the manner it deserves. While I respect your reasons, I cannot accept them. Specialist Eli Chun was my nephew. I watched him grow into a brilliant young man with a passion for the stars and a commitment to service. When he died, my family's grief was absolute. But in our darkest moments, we found solace in knowing that his death meant something, that his sacrifice paired with your refusal to quit, saved 11 lives. You honor my nephew more by living well than by hiding in grief. Please, Sergeant Harlow, do not waste the gift Eli died to protect." Blake's voice broke on the last sentence. Vincent's hands covered his face, 16 years of guilt crashing against the words of a general he'd never met, but whose nephew had died in his arms. "General Chun passed away 5 years ago," Blake continued. "But before he died, he asked me to find you, to give you this letter if we ever could, to tell you that Eli's family holds no blame. Only gratitude that their son died beside someone who honored his sacrifice by completing the mission." Vincent couldn't speak. Elena's arm wrapped around his shoulders, holding him steady as he shook with sobs that had been building for 16 years. George Patterson had entered quietly during the reading, Marcus beside him. The boy carried a wooden box, his face serious with the weight of the responsibility he'd been given. He approached Vincent and held out the box. "We found these in Eli's belongings," George said softly. "His family wanted you to have them." Vincent opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were Eli's dog tags, his ranger scroll, and the astronomy book Vincent had given to Marcus. But the book was different now. Marcus had pressed flowers between certain pages, marking constellations with careful notes in a child's handwriting. Orion, Andromeda, Cassiopeia, each constellation labeled with dates and locations where Marcus had observed them. "I've been learning," Marcus said, "so I can teach you like your friend would have wanted." Vincent pulled the boy into an embrace, holding him as tears continued to fall. "Thank you," he whispered. "Eli would have loved you." Sarah Brennan stood near the back of the room with members of the library board. She stepped forward carrying a plaque. "The board voted unanimously," she said. "The Vincent Harlow and Eli Chun Memorial Community Room, dedicated to those who serve and those who sacrifice, honoring the bond of brotherhood that transcends even death." The room erupted in applause. Vincent stood slowly, his leg protesting but holding Elena supporting his weight. He looked at the 11 Rangers, at their families, at the children who existed because he'd made a promise to a dying friend. "I don't deserve this," Vincent said, his voice barely carrying. "I was just doing my job." Blake shook his head firmly. "Sir, you held a position for 20 hours with catastrophic injuries. You eliminated 73 hostiles. You saved 11 lives while suffering from blood loss and shock that should have killed you. That's not just doing your job. That's heroism that defines a generation of Rangers." Vincent's eyes moved to the photographs on the wall, to Eli's young face frozen in time. "My friend deserved to be here, deserved to see this, deserved to meet all your children and know his sacrifice mattered." "He's here," Carlos said softly. "In the name I gave my son. In the stars Marcus is learning. In the fact that we're all standing in this room, because he did his job and you did yours." The ceremony continued with testimonials from each Ranger, stories of the lives they'd built, the families they'd created, the good they contributed to the world. Each story a thread in the tapestry of consequences that flowed from one man's refusal to abandon his post. Whitmore had sent a letter, read aloud by Sarah. It was a formal apology, acknowledging his terrible judgment and announcing a substantial donation to veteran homeless programs. He had resigned from every board position he held, his reputation destroyed by the viral videos, but attempting redemption through action. Vincent listened to it all with the expression of a man processing more grace than he'd believed possible. When it came time for him to speak, he stood slowly, Elena's hand on his arm, Marcus beside him holding the astronomy book. 16 years ago, Vincent began, his voice steady despite the emotion. "I made a promise to my friend as he died in my arms. He told me to finish the mission, to not let the Rangers in that valley die because of him." His eyes swept the room. "I kept that promise, but then I forgot how to keep the promises I made to myself, to my wife, to my daughter." He paused, finding Elena's eyes. "I spent 6 years punishing myself for surviving, convinced that I didn't deserve help or kindness or family because better people had died." He looked at the photographs of Eli. "But I was wrong. Surviving isn't betraying the dead. It's honoring them by living well, by accepting help, by allowing people who care about you to carry some of the weight. Blake and the other Rangers stood at attention, their respect absolute. Vincent's voice grew stronger. To the 11 men in this room, I need you to know something. You don't owe me anything. We were Rangers together. We did our jobs. The fact that we all made it home is the only thanks I ever needed. Sir, Blake said firmly. With respect, you don't get to decide that. We owe you everything, and we're going to spend the rest of our lives making sure you know it. Vincent nodded slowly, accepting what he couldn't change. Then I have one request. Help other veterans who are hiding like I was. Find them. Bring them home. Don't let them spend 6 years thinking they're better off invisible. The room filled with affirmative responses, commitments made in the moment but meant to last. Blake pulled out his phone, showed Vincent a website. The Eli Chin Foundation for Homeless Veterans. We started it 2 weeks ago. Named after your spotter. Funded by donations that poured in after your story went public. We've already housed 12 veterans and connected 30 more with services. Vincent stared at the screen, at Eli's photograph on the foundation homepage, at the mission statement about bringing invisible heroes home. His voice broke. He would have loved this. He would have loved you being found, Blake said. Would have been furious that you disappeared for 6 years instead of accepting help. Marcus tugged on Vincent's sleeve. Are you going to help too? With the foundation. Vincent looked down at the boy, at the astronomy book in his small hands, at the future that was slowly, tentatively opening before him. Yeah, he said softly. Yeah, I think I am. The ceremony concluded with a moment of silence for Eli Chun and all the fallen, then transformed into something closer to a family reunion. Rangers introduced their children to the man who had made their births possible. Spouses thanked Vincent with tears in their eyes. Grandchildren, too young to understand the full story, simply knew that this man with a limp was important. As the evening wound down, Elena found her father standing before Eli's photograph, his fingers tracing the frame. You ready to go home? She asked. Vincent turned to her, his eyes still wet but clear. Home. The word felt foreign but possible. Yeah, I'm ready. Outside, the news cameras had multiplied. The story of the reunion had drawn national attention. But Vincent walked through them with his head up, his daughter beside him, no longer trying to disappear, but learning, slowly, to be seen. 6 months had passed since the library. Vincent stood in the Eli Chan Foundation's new headquarters, a renovated building downtown that served as both office space and transitional housing for homeless veterans. The surgery to remove the embedded shrapnel had been successful, and while his limp remained, the constant pain had finally subsided to manageable levels. He'd gained 35 pounds, his face had filled out, and the haunted look that had defined him for 6 years had been replaced by something harder to name, but easier to recognize. Purpose. The foundation had grown beyond anything Blake Morrison had imagined when he'd created it in those first emotional weeks. Donations had poured in from across the country, driven by Vincent's story and the viral videos that refused to fade from public consciousness. They'd housed 63 veterans so far, connected over 200 with services, and created a model that other cities were beginning to replicate. Vincent's role had evolved organically. He worked as an outreach coordinator, walking the streets he'd once lived on, talking to veterans who were hiding the way he had hidden. His limp made him approachable. His story made him credible. His refusal to give up on anyone made him effective. Today marked a special milestone. The foundation was hosting its first group graduation, 8 veterans who had successfully transitioned from homelessness to stable housing and employment. Vincent stood near the podium, watching the graduates file in with their families, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Pride. Elena arrived with Marcus and George, the 3 of them having become fixtures at foundation events. Marcus, now 11, carried the astronomy book everywhere, his knowledge of constellations rivaling what Eli had known. The boy had appointed himself Vincent's assistant, helping with outreach and bringing a child's honest compassion to interactions with wary veterans. Dad, you're staring at nothing again, Elena said with gentle humor. Nervous about the speech. Vincent smiled, the expression coming more easily now than it had 6 months ago. Always nervous. Public speaking wasn't part of Ranger training. You held a ridge for 20 hours under enemy fire, George said dryly. I think you can handle speech. The ceremony began with Blake Morrison welcoming the crowd, his remarks brief but meaningful. He introduced Vincent not as Sabre or Silver Star recipient, but simply as the man who understood what it meant to be lost and the determination it took to be found. Vincent approached the podium, his limp noticeable but no longer shameful. He looked at the 8 graduates, saw their nervous pride, and recognized the journey they traveled because he'd made the same journey himself. 6 months ago, Vincent began, I was sleeping under the 4th Street Bridge, convinced I was better off invisible, certain that accepting help was weakness and that I deserved the isolation I'd created. His eyes moved to Elena in the audience. I was wrong about all of it. He paused, letting the silence speak to the weight of that admission. The man who saved me wasn't a counselor or a caseworker, though they helped too. It was a 10-year-old boy who asked why I limped and actually cared about the answer, who held my hand when I needed it most, who reminded me that kindness exists even in moments of humiliation. Marcus beamed from his seat, George's hand on his shoulder with obvious pride. Vincent's gaze moved to the graduates. You 8 represent something essential. You represent the truth that it's never too late. That rock bottom isn't the end. That accepting help isn't surrender. It's the bravest thing you can do. He gestured to the audience. These people, your families and friends and the foundation staff, they didn't give up on you. They saw worth when you couldn't see it yourselves. One of the graduates, a Marine veteran named Patricia Morrison, no relation to Blake, wiped tears from her eyes. She'd been living in her car for 18 months before the foundation found her. Now she had an apartment and a job as a counselor for other homeless women veterans. Vincent continued, his voice gaining strength. My friend Eli Chun died 16 years ago on a mountain in Afghanistan. For years, I thought the way to honor him was to punish myself for surviving, to refuse help, to disappear. His hands gripped the podium. I was dishonoring him, because Eli would have wanted me to live well, to help others, to use the time he didn't get to contribute something good to the world. The room was silent, except for the quiet sounds of people reaching for tissues. Vincent looked directly at the graduates. You've all lost something. Friends, time, opportunities, parts of yourselves. But you're here now. You accepted help. You've done the hard work of healing. And what you do with the time ahead, that's how you honor what you've lost. He stepped back from the podium as applause filled the room. Blake took over, presenting certificates and sharing brief stories of each graduate's journey. When Patricia received hers, she asked to say a few words. She approached the microphone with visible nervousness. Mr. Harlow, you told me something 3 months ago when I first came here. You said surviving isn't betraying the dead, it's honoring them. She paused, composing herself. I was sleeping in my car and planning to end it all. Your words saved my life. So I want you to know that every veteran I help going forward, every woman I counsel, that's my way of paying it forward, of honoring both you and the people we've lost. Vincent nodded, unable to speak past the emotion in his throat. Elena caught his eye from the audience, her smile proud and loving. After the ceremony, as people mingled over refreshments, Marcus approached with his ever-present astronomy book. Vincent, I figured out something. Can I show you? The boy opened to a marked page showing Cassiopeia. Eli wrote notes in the margins. Look, he pointed to small handwriting Vincent had never noticed. Notes about trajectory calculations using star positions for orientation. This is how he helped you make those impossible shots. Using the stars. Vincent stared at the page, at Eli's handwriting preserved across 16 years, at the genius of a young man who had turned his passion into tactical advantage. I never knew he wrote in the margins. I just carried it, never really read it. Marcus's expression was serious beyond his years. Maybe you weren't ready before, but you're ready now. George joined them, his arm around Marcus. The boy's right. You're different now, Vincent. Lighter, like you're not carrying the whole mountain anymore. Vincent considered this. The guilt hadn't disappeared. The grief over Eli and Catherine remained. but it had transformed from a crushing weight into something more bearable. A scar instead of an open wound. I'm learning that I don't have to carry it alone. Elena approached with Sarah Brennan, who had become a board member of the foundation. Sarah held her phone. "Vincent, you need to see this. It's trending again." The screen showed a video, but not the library footage. This was new, filmed earlier that day, without Vincent's knowledge. It showed him walking the downtown streets, talking to a homeless veteran hunched against a building. The caption read, "From invisible to invaluable. 6 months of transformation. Watch what happens when we refuse to give up on our heroes." The video had millions of views. Comments poured in from veterans sharing their own stories, from people pledging donations, from cities asking how to replicate the Foundation's model. "This is bigger than you now," Sarah said. "The model you've helped create, it's becoming national policy. Congress is drafting legislation based on the Eli Chun Foundation's approach." Vincent shook his head, still uncomfortable with the attention. "It's not about me. It's about the veterans we're finding." "It's about both," Blake said, joining the group. "It's about showing the country that homeless veterans aren't lost causes. That with proper support, everyone can come back. Your story proved that. Now it's inspiring systemic change." The evening wound down with promises to stay connected, with graduates heading to their new homes instead of shelters or streets, with the foundation staff already planning outreach for the next cohort. Vincent found himself standing in the empty conference room with Elena, looking at photographs on the wall documenting the foundation's work. One photo showed Vincent and Marcus reading the astronomy book together on a park bench. Another showed him embracing a veteran he'd just helped place in housing. A third captured the moment at the library when Elena had wrapped her arms around him, his face showing the exact instant when walls had crumbled. "Do you remember what you told me 6 months ago?" Elena asked. "That you didn't deserve to be found." Vincent nodded. "I remember. Do you still believe that?" He was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the honesty it deserved. "No, I'm learning that I deserve to be found. That Eli would have wanted me found. That mom would have wanted me home." His eyes met his daughter's. "That you never gave up for a reason." Elena's arms wrapped around him, just as they had in the library 6 months ago. But this time, Vincent didn't break. He held on, steady and present and here. Outside, Marcus waited with George, the astronomy book tucked under his arm. The boy looked up at the night sky, picking out constellations with the knowledge Eli had preserved and Vincent had helped him learn. "There's Orion," Marcus said, pointing, "and Andromeda. And look, you can see Cassiopeia tonight." George followed his grandson's gaze. "Your friend Eli would be proud. Of the Foundation. Of Vincent. Of all of it." Marcus nodded seriously. "I think he's watching. From the stars. Making sure Vincent keeps his promise." "What promise?" George asked. "To finish the mission," Marcus said. "To keep trying. To help people the way he helped those Rangers." His young voice was confident. "And Vincent's doing it. Every single day." Inside, Vincent and Elena emerged from the building. He walked without shame now, his limp a badge of honor rather than a source of pain. When Marcus called out about the stars, Vincent joined them, letting the boy show him constellations he'd once learned from Eli. "Still here, brother," Vincent whispered to the night sky, to the friend whose memory no longer crushed but inspired. "Still trying. We've helped 63 come home so far. Going to make it 100 by year's end." The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent and beautiful. But Vincent wasn't looking for answers in them anymore. He'd found what he needed on Earth, in his daughter's embrace, in a boy's innocent kindness, in the 11 lives saved that had rippled into dozens more, in the foundation built from tragedy and transformation. He'd stopped running, started healing, learned to accept that maybe, just maybe, he was worth the effort people had invested in finding him. And tomorrow, he'd return to the streets he'd once lived on, looking for the next veteran who needed to hear that it wasn't too late. That help was available. That coming home was possible. Because if Vincent Harlow, who had disappeared for 6 years, convinced he was better off invisible, could be found and restored and given purpose again, then anyone could. The mission, the one Eli had given him 16 years ago, wasn't finished. It had simply evolved. From holding a ridge to holding space for broken veterans to heal. From eliminating threats to eliminating barriers to help. From surviving alone to helping others learn they didn't have to. Still here, brother, Vincent repeated. Still trying. And this time, finally, I'm not trying alone. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that second chances are possible and that heroes can be found in the most unexpected places, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Tell us in the comments about the quiet heroes in your life, the people who refused to give up on you when you'd given up on yourself. And remember, every person you pass on the street has a story. Some of them might just be legendary. Thank you for watching.